Welcome back to our ongoing series of director's commentary on the Masters of the Universe Classics figures from Mattel. This is Toy Guru Neitlich, your host here on Spector Creative, and as you can tell from these images, we're talking about Man-At-Arms today. But before we get to Man-At-Arms, I do have a very quick plug to give. I always like to pimp out other He-Man related and fan related projects, and the German fan site Hordak.d has done an amazing book on the '87 movie. They have original behind-the-scenes footage, things from William Stout. They spoke to Dolph Lundgren on the phone and got amazing interviews. It's a really cool book. It's in German. I don't speak German. I speak French. I speak a little Egyptian. But if you want to pick it up, the links are in the description below. All right. With that, back to the show. So, Man-At-Arms is one of the most popular and most recognizable characters in the Masters of the Universe lore. And there's definitely design elements that are very recognizable. The yellow-orange armor, the mustache, and even when you change a few of these elements, like making his armor silver, you can still clearly tell this is Man-At-Arms. So what happens when we transform him even more so? Is it still Man-At-Arms? And why would we do this? Why would we turn him into a Snake Man? Well, I can't really take credit for turning him into a Snake Man. That happened in the continuity of the 2000X Mike Young show. But I can take credit for putting him into the line. I was actually a big force behind getting him into the line, and I'll explain why. So, the Snake Men are villains that go back to the 80s. They were the last faction introduced to the original line after Skeletor and the Horde as villains, but they were the first new faction introduced to the 2000X series in Season 2 when it was rebranded He-Man vs. the Snake Men. And the He-Man were going to take out, no, not this Snake Man, the other Snake Man, there we go. So the Masters were going to challenge King Hiss and his Snake Warriors in Season 2 as a new set of villains after Skeletor and his flunkies, so that you could have new visuals, and especially at retail, you could have a new color branding on package, new elements, and an excuse to give characters upgrades, like He-Man could now be in snake armor, etc., and you could ideally sell He-Man all over again to kids. That was the whole point. So, Man-At-Arms transformation was triggered in the show by this. It is the Serpent's Ring, one of the cool magical devices of the show, and in episode 35, a few of the Masters are turned into snakes. Teela, Mechaneck, who I thought actually in particular had a really cool design with the long neck, and Man-At-Arms. All three of them turned into snakes by the Serpent's Ring, and even Teela had a redecoed figure in 2000X through Toy Fair magazine of her in the snake form. Of course, this was a straight repaint. There were no new parts. It was just done with deco. And Mechaneck never got a figure of his snake form in any of the lines, although it would have been really cool. Here's a fan custom for kind of how cool it could have looked. So by the end of the episode, all three of our Trepid heroes are turned back into their more standard human forms, if you will, and you're left with a cool episode where for a while He-Man was forced to fight some of his allies. Well, fast forward to the very last episode of 2000X, Mike Young show, which was actually done as a comic book because the script never got animated. And in this comic that was available in the DVD set, we learned that Man-At-Arms returned to his snake form permanently. The reason this was done was a few reasons. Boy, I got to get better scripts. So one thing was, characters really move stories forward. And by turning him into a Snake Man permanently, not only was this going to provide consequence, very similar to when the sorceress battles King Hiss and is bitten by him, well, this was essentially the start of her eventual death. She was poisoned by him to eventually, she was going to succumb to this venom, and Teela would have become the new sorceress. And a lot of this was done to show how vicious the Snake Men are, and that there are, consequences to battling them. Likewise, Man-At-Arms was turned into a Snake Man permanently because this was not only moving the story forward, but it was a reason from a toy perspective to introduce Snake Man vehicles. So much like the Masters had vehicles and Skeletor and his cronies had vehicles, the Snake Men were going to now get snake-themed vehicles at retail, ideally, if the line had kept going. because you need a full line. You can't just have figures. You need vehicles and playsets. So by returning Man-at-Arms to snake form for the long haul, he was now sort of like lost to the good guys, and they no longer had their weapons master, and now King Hiss essentially gains a weapons master. So transforming this figure into a figure, or rather this character into a figure, there were a lot of discussions about what accessories and how he should be done. We definitely wanted to include the snake ring, or the serpent's ring, because, it was the device that caused his transformation. And this was something we actually teased fans with by putting the serpent ring out at New York Comic Con without the figure, just sort of putting it there as a tease and having people wonder what figure it would come with. The Horseman really wanted to do kind of oversized feet with snake claws sort of like ripping through the boots and coming out. And this was one of the only things I ever nixed as far as their ideas and saying, actually, I don't want to do that. And the reason was we were going to include a whole bunch of other parts. For example, we were going to have a helmetless Man-at-Arms, not this version, the cool one from 2000X, where he has the ponytail. So if we'd had the boots with snake feet ripping through the leather and, coming out, as cool as that would have looked, it wouldn't have allowed us to do what we actually wanted with the figure. So in addition to the maskless head, he was also originally supposed to come with his blaster gun from 2000X. So this would have allowed the figure with head swaps and armor swaps to essentially, you could make any Man-at-Arms you wanted. It was going to help with the mix and match, which was built into classics from day one with removable heads and armor. So if you wanted to put on the helmetless head, if you wanted to put on the blaster on his arm, if you wanted the snake head, the mustache head, the non-mustache head, you now had all of these options. And if we'd done the boots with the snake feet coming out, you wouldn't have been able to do that. Now, as I explained in this video here, there's a link above, deco can really make a figure difficult to do. And Snake-Man-At-Arms was one of those. And because of how much deco Man-at-Arms had, we had to lose the extra head and the blaster, which meant we wound up with a figure that was basically standard Man-at-Arms with a new head and the serpent's ring. And fans were definitely right in saying, whoa, this just kind of looks like a cheap solution. This doesn't feel like a real awesome figure. And totally heard them. This was one of the few times in the line we were able to quickly react to fan comments. So the Horseman redesigned the figure using different parts. So using King Grayskull's loincloth and some trapjaw arms and legs so that he had more of a kind of mechanical suit on that was a little bit closer to 2000X, even doing two different colored boots there. So this was a way to, again, provide another Man-at-Arms buck, basically, so that you could now mix and match heads, armor, weapons, etc. to make whichever Man-at-Arms you wanted. And while we never told people about the helmetless head or the blaster, I knew about them, and I always felt that they were supposed to be part of this release. And I was very determined to find a way to get these out no matter how hard I had to try. And it took until towards the end of my tenure on the brand, we were able to get Man-at-Arms with the battle ram, and that was when we could finally tool up that head, and then the gun was tooled up for a weapons pack. And I can tell you, for years, I was just trying so hard to get both of these accessories out because I felt, even though we never announced them, they were meant to be part of this release and to make it a cooler release. Another thing to add is the snake heads that came with the Palace Guards pack. There were 4 different heads. They were also meant to be Snake-Man-At-Arms flunkies, as if he took the Serpent's Ring and then transformed some Palace Guards in order to bulk up his personal crew. So that's where that head comes from, too. It was meant to be used for his sort of personal army, I guess, while serving King Hiss. And some work also went into what we were going to call this figure. If it was going to be transformed Man-at-Arms, snake transformation. But really, we settled on Snake-Man-At-Arms, because he's a member of the Snake-Men, so Snake-Man-At-Arms. It just had that great MOTU feel, and I was really proud of this name in particular. And we were able to accomplish the goal of this figure, which was that, that mix and match system. So now you had a more 2000X body that you could put on different heads, and you could swap around to make the Man-at-Arms of your dreams. Isn't that right, Duncan? That's right, Scott. See you next time.